A skeptic is hard to convince of anything, and we should be. We ought to be asking all of the hard questions and expecting rational, evidence based answers. In fact, everyone should be. But the religious don't, because they're just not that bright, are they? I guess we have to show them how to do it, though, right? So let's get on that coming up next. Let's do some more Randal Rauser. I've got a couple of his videos in the queue, so we really need to get out and cover them. I really do like Randal. I think he's on the road towards atheism, or at the very least, towards being much more critical of Christianity, which I think is a very good thing. Once you start questioning the religion, it's really hard to keep taking it seriously. But today, he's going to ask us if a particular miracle would or should convince us. I'm going to say no up front, although I don't know what he's going to produce, so I really don't know. I just know that no supposed miracle ever presented by the religious has ever been remotely convincing, at least to me. But hey, I'm willing to take a look. How about you? So here we go. Let's have it, Randal.
I want to talk about the concept of a miracle and present an idea to you, a case study, a hypothetical scenario to see whether you, if you were a skeptic, whether that would persuade you or at least move the needle toward believing that God exists or that Christianity is true.
That's not really what I expected this to be, but sure, whatever. I'm game. In other videos that he's done, he's gone after existing apologist content and been very critical of it, so that's kind of what I was assuming he was going to do here, but hey, I like being taken by surprise occasionally, so let's do this. Now, I'm going to be very upfront and say that here's something that you can't understand, therefore God done it, is never going to work on me. If he tries that, he fails immediately. God is not the automatic answer to any question for which you do not have an immediate, emotionally comforting solution. I don't know is always going to win out. This is where we see the religious having problems so often because they think God done it is the automatic go-to and is just not. The only way to get to God done it is to prove that God exists first in some demonstrable and evidence-based way, and to prove that God actually done the thing that you're trying to get to. You are not going to have that, and I don't expect him to. I'm just going to say that right now. You just won't have it because such things simply don't exist. Not that they can't, but that they don't. And if they did, we'd have seen it by now because the religious would have been screaming it from the mountaintops. But they have to rely on these stupid religious arguments, so we know they've got nothing. So about as close as I might be able to give him is if he can present something so beyond anything that we have any experience with, and then my answer is just going to be, I don't know, because you haven't actually proven your God, or any God, is actually real or responsible for whatever it is you're claiming. So let's go into this with realistic expectations, which is something I would hope that Randal was doing. But since we haven't seen it, we just don't know. So let's get back to Randal. What do you have for us?
So, first of all, let's talk about the concept of a miracle itself. Though there's a lot of misunderstanding on the concept of a miracle. And when I talk about the concept of a miracle, I'm specifically talking about the Judeo Christian tradition rooted in the Old and New Testaments.
But that's the thing. You haven't shown that any of those traditions actually mean anything. My book says a thing is completely irrelevant. The definition of a miracle in general is a surprising and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. I mean, I'm fine with the first half, but I am never going to go with the last half because gods are not automatic explanations for stuff that we just don't understand. The answer is always going to be we don't know, at least until you can prove to our satisfaction that a god, any god, is demonstrably real, and we all know that they're not even trying. This is why all of these miracle claims fail, because they're just assuming things that they cannot justify by evidence. They just really want it to be true. And I'm sorry, but faith isn't remotely in my rational vocabulary, and it never will be. You can't get to God as a rational candidate explanation until you can show some really good reason to think that gods are even possible, much less actually exist. And as I said, they're not even trying to do that. If something weird happened, the most rational explanation is that it's a natural event that we simply do not understand yet. There's no reason to leap to a god. So hopefully he'll have an answer to that beyond have faith, because my answer is always going to be no.
The common conception that people often have is that a miracle is somehow a violation of natural law or an event with no natural causal explanation.
Which is basically the dictionary definition that I provided. I'm fine with that explanation, at least the first half, but we'll just go with it for shits and giggles. That doesn't make miracles supernatural, though. People will say that a child is a miracle, but let's be honest, their parents still fucked. It's a perfectly natural thing that the overly emotional attach a label to that really has no intelligent meaning. It just sounds good to them. That's why I'm holding to the title of his video, which is, Would This Miracle Convince You That God Exists? And I'm almost certainly going to say no, not because I'm biased against any rational conclusion, but because I can't even imagine how they would even get me there. Because I'm not about to just attach comforting names to things that I just really want to be true. That is not how rational people operate. A thing is either true or it's not true. And the only way to get to that truth is to examine the evidence for that thing and come to the most rationally derived conclusion based upon it. My feelings mean absolutely nothing, and neither do yours. And this is where I figure he's going to go wrong. Let's see if I'm right.
But that is, I would say, neither necessary nor sufficient for a miracle. The core idea of a miracle. So there are a couple of Greek words, semeion and dunamis. So semeion is sign and dunamis is power. And together, I think that gives you a sense of really the biblical and New Testament and root Christian understanding of the concept of a miracle.
But that assumes things that are simply not in evidence. I don't care about a Christian understanding. I care about reality. That's why I gave the definition that I did, and unless he gives me a good reason to consider other alternatives, that's what I'm going to stick with. If you just redefine a miracle as something that you personally think is cool or whatever, so what? You're still nowhere close to getting to a god. I'm willing to give him a chance to change my mind, but this really comes off like what we see from a lot of other apologists all the time. Just a series of word games designed to get people to where they really want you to be, and that's never going to work on me. I don't think that Randal is that kind of person, although, granted, I could be wrong. So let's get back and see.
Where a miracle is a sign of God's action and of God's power.
You haven't shown that either of those are reasonable inferences in the first place. Again, God done it tends to be the automatic go-to for anything that the religious don't understand or don't like, and that is not going to work on me. I care what's actually true. I care what's actually demonstrably true. Not what is comforting or what gets you to the answer that you really feel good about. None of those things matter. I don't care about feeling good. I'm perfectly fine with, I don't know. It's going to take something really special to get me over the hump to any gods, and that is going to have to include demonstrable evidence which anyone can examine without having to believe in things first. And let's be honest, we all know Randal simply doesn't have any of that because no theist in the history of forever ever has. If you see something that you do not understand, that doesn't mean God done it. It just doesn't.
But not necessarily one that involves God intervening in natural events and somehow, let alone violating a natural law or providing an event with no natural causal explanation to it.
But you're still just assuming that God exists in the first place, which is not in line with the verifiable facts. I've said this before, but if you ever watch a debate on does God exist, you will see that the theist invariably never argues for that in any worthwhile way. They just assume it. They can't demonstrate it. It's all, it sounds good to me. But that's not a debate, that's an assertion. And I don't care about your assertions. I care about your facts. And sadly for the religious, they simply don't have any. So as much as I like Randal, I am not going to let him off the hook. He asked a very specific question, and that carried with it very specific requirements. And I don't think for 1 second that he'll be able to meet them, but let's get back and find out.
What this means is that, in principle, a miracle could have a perfectly natural explanation. Nonetheless, because of the context in which it occurs, it becomes a sign, it becomes significant, it becomes meaningful, and as a sign of God's divine action and perhaps a message that he's conveying to the individual, it becomes a miracle.
But you can't prove that. That's the problem. You are loading in your own theology into something that is entirely evidence-based. How do you actually get there? Walk us through the steps. I mean, you can see the thing, it's right there, the event happened, but how do you get to the meaning that you're inserting into the event? This is exactly why religious testimony means absolutely nothing. This thing happened to me, and that means God done it. Sorry, but you're going to have to be able to prove that that conclusion is true. Just because you really like the idea doesn't mean anything, and that's what the religious testimony all comes down to. An unjustifiable claim attached to something which may or may not have happened as described. But the conclusion is never able to be demonstrated. You can't just get from shit happened to there's a God without a whole lot more evidence than you have. That's the problem. That's why testimony will never convince anyone, nor should it. I'm not questioning that something happened to you. I'm questioning the conclusions that you've drawn from it. I'm questioning how you ruled out other potential rational explanations before you just jumped to, God done it. Because as we all know, they never even try to do that. Because they just don't care.
So imagine, for example, you're walking through the woods and you see a rock floating in a lake. That would be odd. Perhaps that would even be a violation of natural law.
Or not. I mean, volcanic rock, otherwise known as pumice, that floats just fine. Or maybe there's something under the water that you just can't see that's holding up the rock and making it look like it's floating. That requires more investigation. You can't just leap to, God done it, which is what a lot of theists do. But let's just imagine that there really is a rock floating in the middle of a lake. What can we conclude from that? Well, let's just say we swim out there and grab the rock. It's a normal heavy rock like we see everywhere. We put it back in the water and it still floats. There's nothing under it to hold it up. We don't understand why it's doing that. We'd have to be able to investigate why that's happening. We might be able to do that and we might not. The fact that we can't doesn't make the event supernatural. It just means we don't know. There are all kinds of things that we just don't know. And that doesn't mean God done it. In order to get to God, you'd have to be able to demonstrate that God is a rational candidate explanation. And sorry, but you just haven't done that. In fact, I can't even think of a way that you could, given our current knowledge. God is never going to be a rational candidate explanation until you can find some way to suggest that any gods might potentially be real. And you're not even close to doing that. Get to work.
At least as we understand it. But it wouldn't be a miracle. Simple anomalous events that appear to violate natural laws we understand it have no natural causal explanation. That in and of itself is not sufficient to make something a miracle.
Tell that to the religious wingnuts because they think that everything's a miracle. Finding their car keys is a miracle. That's one reason why I figure he should be asking all of these questions. And I don't know, he might be, but God done it without any evidence whatsoever in support is pretty much off the table because it isn't a rational position to take. It's an assertion, not a demonstrable fact, and you need it to be as close to a demonstrable fact as possible to even intellectually consider the possibility. Now, I don't know where he's going to go from here. We'll just have to watch along and find out. But right now, he's just not blowing smoke up my skirt. He's not showing me any reason to think that miracles exist at all, even hypothetically, or that any gods are possibly responsible. That's what he needs to do. So let's get back to Randal and see where this goes.
But let's say that man was saying he is a prophet, and you said, well, then show me you're a prophet, and he threw a rock onto the water and it floated.
That doesn't prove anything. Again, pumice floats. You can find all kinds of videos on YouTube with people walking on water because there's something just beneath the surface. This is not as impressive as you seem to think that it is. Magicians have been doing this crap forever, and it's only because most people tend to be gullible that any of it ever gets believed. Granted, that's exactly how religion works too. People are stupid and looking for reasons to believe, and the con man clergy are good at telling comforting stories and making unsupported claims, such that people will just roll over and believe it because they're dumb. That doesn't make any of it magic, and it certainly doesn't make any of it true. Because even if this person does claim to be a prophet, that doesn't make their prophecy claim true. They could be lying. They could be delusional. Claims mean nothing until they are verified with evidence. And once again, we're back to square one because you can't prove that any gods actually exist. Claiming to be a prophet of a god that you can't show is real means nothing. So still no go, Randal. You need to be better than this.
Now there is an additional context so that the same action of the rock floating on the water becomes meaningful. It becomes a sign, a semeion of dunamis, a sign of power.
No, it doesn't. It's just something that you do not currently understand. That doesn't attach any other potential explanation to it whatsoever. Claims are claims, truth is truth. The only way to get from a claim to the truth is to provide the evidence necessary to demonstrate that it actually is true. And I bet your prophet wouldn't be able to do that, would he? Just because he says God gives him the power doesn't mean that God gives him the power, any more than the fact that David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty supposedly disappear means that God done it. You can't get from a thing to a god without being able to fill in all of the steps in the middle, and we all know they can't do that.
And in that case, it becomes a miracle.
No, it doesn't. It remains something that we do not understand, perhaps something that we cannot ever understand, but that doesn't mean that the empty claims made about the event are actually true. Now, I'm not a magician. I guess I kind of messed around with it when I was a kid, but I never took it all that seriously. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that I was a great magician. I could fool people all over the place. If I did a card trick, the best card trick that had ever been done, that no one could ever explain how I'd done it, and I claimed that invisible, intangible, card trick granting pixies gave me the power to do it, That doesn't mean that the pixies exist. It just means that I said a thing, and that thing may or may not be true. The only way to find out if it's actually true is to examine the claim, and if no evidence can be found in support, then the claim itself can be dismissed because there's no reason at all to take it seriously. The same thing goes for your God. Just because you say your God is real, that doesn't make it so. That's something that religion really needs to figure out because it's never going to change.
Well, that could be a miracle. So something perhaps that seems to violate natural law or to have no natural causal explanation. Again, it need not be the case that it is somehow in breach of natural law as we understand it.
Being a violation of natural law as we understand it doesn't make it a miracle. We learn new things all the time. When we started to understand quantum mechanics, that didn't make anything that quarks did miracles. It was just stuff that we needed to figure out. No gods required. That's how the nature of human knowledge has gone forever. We see something that we don't understand, the gullible rubes say, God done it. We research it and find out that it's a perfectly natural phenomenon. The gullible rubes were just wrong. Never once have we ever found any gods that were actually responsible for anything. It's all just nature. So why would we think that this rock-throwing prophet guy of yours is any different? We shouldn't, because we'd be foolish if we did.
But a miracle could be perfectly explained in terms of natural law, but nonetheless could compel a person as the most meaningful explanation being a divine sign.
But that's where you're going wrong. Compelling a person is not the same thing as the thing you say actually being correct. I don't care if dumb people believe it. I care if it's actually true. If you go watch old movies where the adventurers are exploring in deepest, darkest Africa or wherever, and they get captured by natives, but they get out of it because they had a lighter or they knew when the conveniently timed eclipse was going to happen, that doesn't make any of those things miracles, no matter what the natives might believe. It doesn't matter what anyone accepts. It matters what's actually true. This has been the kind of scam that the religious have been running forever. Tell a bunch of lies, soothe the gullible with comforting stories, and you can get them to hand over their money with hardly any effort. But that doesn't make any of it true. Your miracle stories don't mean anything unless you can demonstrate that they're actual miracles, performed by demonstrable gods, and Randal hasn't gotten anywhere close. No theist has. Why? Because they don't care about the truth, only about their own emotional comfort. I don't care what convinces anyone if their conviction isn't based on verifiable evidence. And so far, the religious have never demonstrated that it is, and that's the problem. That's why they're falling apart, and good riddance to them. He's just proving everything wrong with his own religion, whether he understands that or not. Now, maybe we'll come back next time and find that's what he was trying to do all along. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. He might get to the very end and say, yep, I'm convinced miracles are bullshit. In fact, I hope that's what he does. So what do you hope? Let me hear down in the comments, because this is another video where he gets really, really close to the truth, and I'm hoping he doesn't just veer off into La La Land. But I guess we're going to have to wait until next week to see. And I hope you all join me then.